Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn McEntee, and I'm here for the Toronto Diversity Festival to welcome you. Welcome to the 6th Annual Toronto Diversity Festival. This is our final installment of the festival itself, where we met in person at Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. And this last installment is a panel discussion with some guest experts in our community to celebrate the oneness of humanity, but also to explore workplace discrimination. So again, my name is Lynn McEntee, and I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement, and then we can get right into introducing our guests. Alrighty. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people of all the lands that we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, what we call home. So welcome to all of you, welcome to this discussion, and welcome to our guest experts for allowing us to be here. The Toronto Diversity Festival celebrates the oneness of humanity, as I had said, and we're really about underscoring one world and one people. As far as in the festival itself, we had a great time in the summer. We actually had MPP Sharif Sabawi, who was there as well in person, and we're really happy to have him back here again today. The festival itself is celebrating one, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, or other ideologies. We celebrate the spirit of oneness. Welcome to the Toronto Diversity Festival panel discussion. Firstly, I would like to introduce MPP Sharif Sabawi. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. And you're representing Erin Mills, Mississauga.
Yes, Southern Ireland, yes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here today. I'll introduce our other guests and then we'll get into our hardcore questions. Alrighty, and on the other part of the screen, we have Dr. Sarah Shaw, and you're representing the University of Toronto, but you have also a few other things in your bio as well. Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Research Associate at the University of Toronto of Islamic Studies, and a student therapist at Gestalt Institute of University of Toronto.
Yes, it's at the Gestalt Institute of Toronto, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate that. We've had the honor of also having Lonnie Frank again, joining us in this discussion. And Lonnie is representing actually Toronto Met University, and she's a Master of Arts in Child and Youth Care. So welcome, Lonnie, as well. Lonnie Frank.
It's good to be here with all of you.
Thank you. We had an amazing discussion the last time we met. So thank you so much once again. Our guest panelists were issued all the same questions, and we're going to get right into workplace discrimination, and we're defining what is workplace discrimination. I'm actually going to start out with you, MPP Sabawi.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. And as you might know, I am myself immigrant. Like I immigrated to Canada 28 years ago. So I consider myself like first generation Canadian. I'm proud Canadian. And part of my, I would say part of my career was but in politics. I'm IT specialist, IT professor and IT specialist. So I had 36 years in IT. But as a politician, part of my political career is I did outreach for the past 18 years to different communities, different groups, different minorities, different oppressed, refugees, victims of any sort of war or genocide or whatever. So that helped me to build understanding of a lot of dynamics globally. I'm saying as a Coptic Egyptian who maybe suffered at some parts of my life from discrimination or religious disappointments, I would say, from different groups. And lately, even in 2010, I was in the hit list from Al Qaeda, like for the activities I'm doing in the human rights level. So I'm hoping I can bring a value. Also, as a professor, I've been working with international students. Like lots of my students are international, so I understand the arena of international students as students, and also as in the future will be Canadians, Canadian citizens getting through the the system to be part of our great country. So I hope I can add a value, and I'm open to any discussions.
Oh, very much so. And we've had the pleasure of speaking with you before, and we're just an honor to speak with you, and we learn and grow so much along the way. So thank you very much for being here today and definitely adding to the conversation. So thank you. Alrighty, I'll go to you, Sarah, please, and thank you. A little bit about yourself, but also talking about what is discrimination in some ways.
For sure. Thanks for asking. So a little bit about myself. I'm actually a lead researcher at the Muslims in Canada Data Initiative at the Institute of Islamic Studies. And in my role there, I partner with community organizations to deliver the kinds of data that they're looking for in terms of being able to provide programming or provide policy recommendations, for example. One of the projects that I'm working on right now is actually called the Aspire Project. It's a partnership with the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, and it's actually being funded by WAGE, Women and Gender Equity Canada. And the purpose of that project is specifically to look at the kinds of barriers or the kinds of blockades that women experience as they try to either be hired or be promoted and advanced through an organization. And through that research, I'm actually finding that when we think about discrimination, it's actually very subjective to where the woman's social position is. So, for example, a woman who's working in an entry-level position is going to face different kinds of barriers, different kinds of workplace discrimination than someone who's maybe working a white-collar job or a more competitive occupation. So I guess I'll step back and first just talk about like what is discrimination. It's we can think of it as like the unfair treatment that is pointed at a person or a group of individuals, and it's usually around some kind of social dimension, so either gender-based or race-based, religious-based. What is really important to know about discrimination is the outcomes or the consequences of discrimination, and those things can be things like unemployment, underemployment, poverty, mental health consequences. There are so many women that I've spoken to in this study who have internalized their difficulties with finding a job as this must be something wrong with me specifically. So instead of recognizing that it's a social problem, it's a systemic problem, they're making it their own problem, and they're trying to figure out how to solve it. But again, because the issue doesn't lie with them, it lies within the labor market, really, the workplace. They're not going to be able to solve it at the individual level. It's something that we need to collectively address at the societal level.
Thank you. I wondered if before we jump over to you, Lonnie, it's okay to just jump back to MPP Sharif Sabawi, just regarding your opinion on discrimination. What is discrimination in your perspective in the work that you do?
In my opinion, discrimination in a very basic definition would be somebody who's treating me based on some criteria which is not based on my actions or something I'm interfering with. So, for example, if somebody looked at me and said, "Oh, this guy is colored or whatever," he could, based on that, start acting on a specific way, in a specific way. It's not based on anything. It's a prior set mind, in a way, based on affiliation, based on color, based on religion, based on gender, of course, like multiple dimensions. But majority of it, it's nothing because of anything I have any hand on. Like it's I'd say assessment based on some other criteria, which can be anything.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Lonnie, thank you for waiting while we introduce the topic. And I wonder if you could tell us a little about yourself, please, and thank you, and your opinion on workplace discrimination. What is discrimination? Yes.
Sure, thank you so much. I am a child and youth worker practitioner. I graduated from Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm not necessarily representing them, I'm just here as a child and youth care practitioner. I also work at 2 post-secondary institutions in the child and youth care, social service worker, and early childhood educator program. So it's a pleasure to be here and to share my point of view on things. And so when I hear the question, what is discrimination, I think the root of the word it is natural for people to categorize things. It just helps us make sense of the world that's around us. When we discriminate between things, we're recognizing that they're different, and people are different. But the value that we place on those different categories, that is learned. And we learn that from our families, from the schools we go to, social media, all sorts of input from around us. And sometimes those messages that we learn about the value of people and the categories we put them in is harmful and unjust and hurtful. And that's unfair discrimination. It's not helpful. And so, like the other two panelists have mentioned, it's an action, it's unfair, unjust, it's harmful, based on, I think the law refers to them as protected, so grounds isn't the word, but that's the word that's coming to mind. Like, these are various grounds that we are protected on. And so things like the age and the race discrimination, these are the ways that people treat us differently. And when that treatment is harmful, that is what is harmful. And that's what's discrimination. And just to add to what Ms. Sarah said, that the outcomes are harmful, specifically around our mental, emotional, and our physical, and even physiologically damaging to whoever's experiencing it.
Mhm. No, thank you very much, Lonnie. I actually see my screen is jumping around a little bit there, so I don't know if you can see that. We can edit that part out as well, but hopefully we can continue on here without the screen being coming and going. I thank you for the topic. You know, my family immigrated from another country as well, and you're automatically categorized when you enter into a new space, if you will, and working with newcomers and survivors of trauma and such, that just follows people throughout their lives, and it's just I guess a natural way, as what you were indicating, Lonnie, to categorize people, put people into a box, I guess, if you will. And I wondered if we could explore just a little bit more about what in particular is workplace discrimination from all of our life's experiences. And I'll go back to you, MPP Sharif Sabawi.
Again, like my point about discrimination, like people have different ways of reacting to discrimination, different ways of tolerance to discrimination, and it's like anything else. Like, for example, you could find a course about dealing with stress. For example, you can find a course about that. You can take a course about how to manage stress, but you wouldn't find a course about how to deal with discrimination. Like, yes, the hope is we can eliminate discrimination, but we know for a fact that it's a personal nature. In my opinion, the only discrimination we can eliminate in full is a systematic one. So if it's embedded into the system, if there's any rules or bylaws or guidelines, which is we consider having traces of discrimination, that have to be changed. Yes, and that's what my hope are. And again, like I would like to maybe take the opportunity to mention that my original involvement with politics was from the Coptic cause. Like, at the time, the Coptic people, the Egyptian Christians, were having some issues, big issues, with the regime in Egypt, and there was lots of incidents where we had, as human rights activists, to spotlight on and activate on, and that was my first interaction. Then I started reaching out to other groups and understand that it's not one-off, it's many, and it's different, and it could be not religious at all. It could be any other thing, like, as I mentioned, like race, color, whatever. So I think there is a room always to start thinking about how can we train people to discover or kind of understand the discrimination and maybe deal with it. Like, how can we deal with it? I think part of it, again, like tolerance, and we don't want us also to be so sensitive, so that it end up to be like, oh, why you are looking at me this way, you're discriminating me. Like it goes all the way to even like extended to be very sensitive to anybody who's doing anything and can categorize as a discrimination, because it will lose the value, it will lose the effect. We need to have some measures, some actions, and some courses about how can we discover it, how can we eliminate it, especially the people who are in HR, because it's day-to-day thing. Like I had few incidents during my career where I felt that yes, there was a discrimination, or in that case, I see that this guy have the right to consider that crossing the lines. Or sometimes I see like, I don't think this is discrimination, but somebody's trying to use it in a way. So we need to have some definition, a clear definition about how can we categorize that as a discrimination or not, if it's individuals, because individuals are different. Of course, systematic, this is something we are done with. Any law, any guidelines, any policy which have any traces of discrimination have to be changed.
Mm-hmm. And as we're moving our way to talk to Lonnie at some point, being in early childhood as well and working in education, that would be a component that's starting from birth, really, when you think about it. Sarah, I wonder if you could jump into the conversation, then we'll bridge into Lonnie's conversation regarding education for the young and educating our educators along the way as well, right? Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And just drawing off of what Lonnie and what Sharif had shared as well, if we think about discrimination, one of the really hard things about being able to pinpoint like if something is discrimination or not is because of the fact that it happens at different levels, as Sharif had identified. There is like the individual level, there's the group or like settings, environmental level, and then there's the systems level or the policy level. And so part of the issue is that a lot of the discrimination that happens, because the policies are written in this kind of like neutral language way, they aren't immediately obvious in terms of being discriminatory. The discrimination really happens at the group or the individual, the micro and the meso levels. So that's where, for example, if a manager has the leeway to say yes or no to a certain policy being enacted in the workplace or the work environment, that they choose to make the decision that might make some people's lives harder, right? And so that's an act of discrimination as well. It's not clearly identifiable because it's not a policy that was written in order to specifically affect a group of people, but that's what the policy ends up doing.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Well said. Thank you so much. Lonnie, I wonder if you feel free to jump in regarding educating our educators and starting from birth, the education of lack of discrimination, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah.
We certainly don't talk about this at all or nearly enough, and it's important for obvious reasons. And when we think about children and how they how we like what the curriculum is for children nowadays, it really is not other centered. It's really about it. I don't know if you can hear my children in the background.
This is life right here.
But so
that's Lonnie, take your time for a second. I can maybe jump in for a second here. I totally agree with Doctor in regards to the different levels of discrimination. But again, like I would like to pinpoint something. Like if for example, if a manager have 5 applicants and the 5 of them are the same level, there will be some sort of personal preference might kick in. Like if the 5 of them are the same level of expertise, same level of skills, same level of credentials, he might pick one of them based on the interview, the comfort level he felt in the conversation, some comfort level with the personality of the person, some level of whatever it is like he would have. This cannot be identified as discrimination by law, because at the end of the day, if one of them was really, really outstanding candidate, for example, and he ignored and picked another guy who's less expertise per se, there we have a case. But if the four of them or the five of them are identical in credentials and skills and stuff, again, the manager who's going to be directly dealing with that person, he could pick somebody, and that's not. I don't think can be categorized as discrimination. It could be comfort level, it could be trust level, it could be anything, personality, outspoken, funny, whatever it is, the criteria which he can pick, as long as the four of them or five of them are identical in credentials, I don't think we have a case in here. The problem usually become when somebody who is like very highly qualified and then get ignored and they pick somebody else, then we have a case. Usually they will go and say, oh, they hired somebody who's much less level than my expertise. And we have kind of case in here. Doctor, do you agree with me?
I do. I also want to share that in terms of the cases that I've seen, it's more along the lines of what you're describing in the second scenario, where a person is highly qualified, but someone who's less qualified than them ends up getting the position. But I also want to add that even if, with the first scenario that you mentioned, if everyone is equally qualified, there's nothing wrong with someone picking the best candidate among other candidates that were equally qualified based on personality or preference. It becomes an issue, however, when the hiring employers are all of a specific background. And so all of the employees that they hire are also of the same background. And so what we see at the aggregate level across society is that individuals who don't fit that background are perpetually underemployed or unemployed.
I monitor this one specifically, doctor, and I think through my career as now, like in Canada, 28 years and a professional career, uh, it's gravitated. Like it's not really bland. It's as much of it is gravitated. Like in old days when I used to apply for a job and somebody's interviewing me and saying like, so like you can feel it from the first question. So which like in the way even he asked you like, so which university you got graduated from? Like from the Alexandria. Where is this? Or like any kind of question like criticism in regards to so where held that or whatever. So from the get-go that he is not appreciating that, right? Uh, Based on the Canadian experience. Like when we talk and the people say, "Oh, we need 2 years of Canadian experience," that was like a big hurdle for all the immigrants to get in their career jobs, even if they are very, 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 very highly qualified. And it still is, but we changed that. Like I worked very hard since I came in power. I worked very closely with Monty McNaughton to do working for workers one and working for workers two, which removed those barriers. So there's 37 profession now. By law, they can ask for experience, but they can't be specific about Canadian experience. So Canadian experience was removed as a qualifier in any credential system in 37 verticals, including engineering, for example. That's removing barriers. Is it discrimination? I don't say it's discrimination. It was a tool, subjective tool. Somebody can use it or choose not to use it to differentiate between people or pick a candidate versus other candidate. That's one of in my opinion, was a big thing. But in the opposite way, in both ways, it works both ways. Like you could go to some group and they would, do you feel that I don't want to, for example, colored people. But in the opposite, you can go for an interview where like the manager or the owner or the majority of the group is from specific ethnicity, for example, and prefer to hire somebody from the same ethnicity because end of the day it's homogeneous, like they don't feel different or they feel more comfortable, whatever. And usually even if they didn't do that through filtering, usually the guy who get hired and he found himself like the white elephant in a big group who are not compatible with him, usually doesn't live there for long. Like it's actually, even if they didn't prevent him from getting hired, most probably he end up leaving because the working environment is not helping him to feel comfortable. Does this make sense?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And again, working with newcomers and such myself as well, you're hitting it right on the nail for sure. Very much so. Lonnie, I wondered if you could jump into in terms of education, and back to you and where you see workplace discrimination and maybe educating the young and starting from there. Please and thank you. And then the work that you do with training educators.
And maybe just before I do that, to comment, I think when given what we talked about last week with diversity, equity, and inclusion, when newcomers, immigrants, and refugees end up leaving a place because the environment is toxic, that's hugely problematic. And I think therein, that is where the discrimination lies. But we can carry on after my first thought around children and how they are raised. So I mentioned we categorize things, and then based on the messages we learn from our families, from our culture, that determines how we, or strongly influences how we treat people and mistreat people. So where I spend a lot of my time when I'm working with young people is recognizing the ways in which we are different and celebrating our differences, but also making sure not to put ourselves on any kind of hierarchy. You are different, you are white, I am brown, you are Asian, I am, and then we go through all the different ways that we are different, and no one is any better or worse than the other. And so it's when we put ourselves above other people, and that kind of solidifies or justifies the mistreatment. And so right at the beginning of education, and hopefully at home, but not always at home, because that's where when we get to school, it's someone's responsibility to say, we are all equal. And if we're not equal, let's point that out and let's move towards equality. Equity is first, obviously, because we're not all starting at the same playing field. We don't all have the same benefits, and lots of us have a lot of disadvantages. But once we get to a place where we're all starting at the same place, then equality can happen. Then we can say, let's make sure everyone is getting, let's always make sure everyone is getting what they need. But that's not always what's happening. But it is important that young people are aware that someone is not getting as much as they need, or someone is getting more than they need, or someone is getting much less than they need. Without that awareness, then we just grow up into adults who just continue to treat or mistreat people, and we're not even aware that we're doing it. So when, Sharif, you talk about preference, our preferences are based on our biases, and our biases are connected to the way that we think about other people. So it might appear, and that's where it gets really tricky, it might appear that it's just a preference. I don't like someone who goes to this particular school. But if you look at the other candidates that they're with, and it just so happens that they are of a different ethnicity or they're a different age group, and the school that the person goes to is a school that is primarily, say, racialized, then it looks like on the surface level that it's just a school thing, but really underlying it, well, that's the school where all these racialized people go to, and I don't like that school. And so preference, I don't want people from that school. And then we are left thinking, if we're the one in that position, is this something, as Sarah was saying, is this inherently something wrong with me, or is it something wrong with the school that I went to, or is it something outside of my control? I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, for sure. Questions or comments from for Lonnie? Yes, MPP Sharif. Yes.
I totally agree with you, Lonnie, in regards to that. Like, of course, the way we were raised, and the way children is educated and grown up in the environment, it affects them. That's why you see the second generation who born in Canada, raised in Canada, and the Canadian system are different. Not only different tolerance and different, it's different personality. Actually, they have a different way of thinking. They have a different methodological way of thinking than than their parents, even. Despite the fact that parents who are sorry, raising them and giving them guidance and everything, But because of the way the environment is set, the way the education is set, the way they already familiar with different people, different communities, different, they deal with people from different ethnicity, different color, different region, different thinking, they become open and more comfortable dealing with everyone. But talking about somebody who immigrated to Canada, for example, from a country, the first time he met people who are not from his own race or own group is when he arrived to Canada. It might take him 20, 25 years to maybe feel comfortable dealing with that. And when we talk about discrimination, like, I just want to point something. I don't think there's any difficulty to identify the real racism or real discrimination. Like the discriminator who are discriminating, he doesn't have big problems in saying that, by the way. Like the people who are doing real hardcore discrimination, they are not hiding it. You know, like they don't try to put it into a very nice looking thing. No, they do it, and you will feel it, and they will tell you that we know that you know. Okay, real discrimination, the real discrimination, real racism is very clear. The people who are using that or doing that, it's built in their personality. They can't hide it. I'm not saying about even like straightforward to it. Like when I go and get in an interview and they say, "So you don't hire Christians." You don't need to pinpoint anything. It's told in your face, "We are not hiring you because you're Christian. We don't hire Christians." Done. Okay. Or you try to apply somewhere and the whole department's from one specific ethnicity. Not to point anything, but some specific ethnicity. And you have 3, 4 candidates and one of them from the same ethnicity. What do you think? Like, doesn't need too much brilliancy or intelligence or like research to figure out what's the outcome of that. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't want to get into a situation where I have to investigate every time I speak to somebody. Is he trying to be funny or discriminating me?
Absolutely. No, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Sarah, did you want to comment there on what's on the table right now for conversation?
Yeah, sure. So this is possibly just my own entry point into the conversation. And so the experiences and the vicarious experiences that I've been exposed to are quite different from what Sharif is describing. I've spoken to a number of women, for example, who they report that they were told either explicitly or implicitly that wearing hijab was a reason that they were not getting hired or not getting promoted in different positions. This is inside of Quebec and outside of Quebec as well, across Canada. And when those women did try to indicate that this is discriminatory, you can't have this policy, or you can't enact this on me. It's against Canadian law in terms of freedom from workplace discrimination. They were flat out told that it's not, that this is okay. This is the way that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the way it is, right? Like there are laws that are in place that say you cannot do that. And so if I may interject here, I remember going for an interview at a pretty reputable organization. I won't say the name, but if I did, you would likely all know it. And going into the space and immediately not seeing anyone who looks like me. So already before the conversation starts, the interview is over. And then the interview happens and it ends as quickly as it started. And I walk out. No one said to me, we don't hire Black people. Like Canadians are not forthcoming like that. Like it's very hidden, it's very microaggressive. But I walk out knowing, given that no one here looks like me, given that no one in the interviewing room looked like me, I'm likely not going to get the job. And I have a case there. Like I feel like I would have a case to say that this is late, and so I leave and know that I've wasted my time. And do I want to make a claim? Do I want to be that go and make a complaint and then I get the job. And then, as you mentioned, if I was to get hired, it would likely not be a safe place for me. And then, as you said, I would end up leaving. If that's the case, we divide in areas. People would be discriminated against on a regular, ongoing basis. And as Sarah said, certain people will continue to be underemployed or unemployed because of that.
You know, and it's interesting because the human right number 23, we've had a Human Rights Commission representative here before, and we've talked about the human rights, and that's what Canada represents is human rights. But to underscore what we're talking about today, not necessarily do we actually live and breathe that. But human right number 23 is the right to work. And you know, what are some of the common types of workplace discrimination? You know, you're talking about them now, but I wondered if you could talk about some other scenarios, and then perhaps a way to help empower people should they run into a situation like that, just from your own experiences in the work that you do on a daily basis. Whoever wants to take that will open up the floor. Yeah. Do you want to go, MPP Sharif? Yep.
Again, like I would like to differentiate few things. Like some of the jobs in nature is not encouraging some gender, for example. Like for example, if we take examples of that, like construction, for example, that construction vertical is a little bit more dominant with men. Because it need like heavy lifting and working conditions not the best. Sometimes it is tough job and need muscles and stuff. That doesn't mean that it's and discriminatory against women, but it could be not preferred vertical for, I would say, majority of them. There's lots of women who did jumped in and took the challenge, and they are in constructions. But talking about there's not 50-50%, I don't think even with whatever it is we do to allow that or to push that, we will be able to get 50-50 because not a lot of women are willing to jump the ladder and go this up and down and carry stuff. And it's the nature of the job itself. I'm not saying that this is discrimination. I can't see that discrimination. It can be personal preference. When I was working for one of the banks, I was carrying the pager, which is like 24/7. I get calls. I can jump in my car and drive somewhere in the boonies to check a server or a network or whatever. And some of the females refuse to carry the pager because in the evening I can't jump at 2 o'clock in the morning and somewhere like I don't feel safe, I don't feel comfortable, I don't like to do that. I don't think that's discriminatory. It's the nature of the job they can accept. Some other women will say, yeah, I will do it. That's fine. But again, the nature of the job could sometimes look like the job is, I would say, rejecting a specific gender, a specific age group, whatever. It could be because of the nature of the job. I don't want to jump into conclusions like, oh, the construction is against women or whatever like that.
We had a gentleman from Skills Ontario here, and we were talking about that access for women to be a part of training, and it's shifting, but not quite as fast as we would like to see, just based on all of the above that you're talking about. But they're really trying hard to get some outreach going in the Skills Ontario field to allow women to enter into the field without trepidation, right? Dr. Shaw, is there a Shaw? Yes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. What are some of the common types of workplace discrimination? We're kind of touching on them here, but if there's anything specifically you would like to highlight and perhaps some strategies for people should they wish to, you know, identify.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I feel that we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the problem. Is it okay if I shift the conversation to talk about solutions?
Yep, very much so. Yeah.
So for example, one of the problems that we've spoken about at length is sort of like the discomfort of being the odd one out. So if there is a workplace where there is more representation of one race or ethnicity for the people who might feel like they're at the margins, I would actually advocate for employers, for people who are in positions of providing supportive roles or leadership roles in those spaces, to model and to encourage workplace social integration, to encourage team building, for example, so that the people who may feel left out have more opportunity to be within the group or feel like they belong to the group. This is actually, as a marker of like a good job, this is actually a marker of having a healthy workplace environment when employees can turn to each other and socialize or talk about things that are not necessarily work related. That would definitely be something to address, feeling like there's social isolation or exclusion at the group level. In terms of policies, I would highly encourage employers to really listen to employees when they raise concerns about issues at the workplace, whether that be about another employee, about a policy, about a project, about a direction that the workplace or the company is going in. Oftentimes when employees come forward with concerns to their supervisors, they're actually sharing the minimum, like the bare minimum of what they feel is defensible, that they have evidence for. There's actually a mountain of intuition, of experiences, of microaggressions, of other forms of discrimination that they might be picking up on, but can't name, can't put their finger on. And so it's important that when employees do come forward, that they're listened to in earnest rather than being discarded or disregarded.
No, thank you very much for focusing on strategies for addressing the issue. And Lonnie, I wondered if you wanted to jump in there, please, and thank you. Some strategies from your perspective in your daily life, but in the work that you do.
So as Sarah was speaking, an experience that I had in the winter semester, I was questioning racism, not for necessarily myself, but for a student who was experiencing it in placement. And the response I got when I brought this forward, I suggested that the student be removed from the placement. And I was told in preparation for this discussion, this meeting, well, I should go out and gather evidence. And it's like, how do you gather evidence of racism, right? Like nobody's saying to her, you're bad because you're Black, you're late and you're Black. They're not doing that. So it's so much harder. So I had to go through and sift through emails and look for things that, again, were questions, like what is the intent here? And the intent here, and it's hard to say, if I'm reading an email and I'm reading it from my point of view as a Black woman, and you're reading the same email from your perspective as a non-racialized person, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. And so if I say to you, the student is experiencing racism, that should be taken seriously. And it's hard to provide evidence because the evidence isn't tangible.
Yeah.
And so in terms of what can be done, I think there's a lot of training. It always goes back to training, but it has to be very specific kind of training. So I said it earlier today, it's hard to eliminate something if you don't know what it is, you're not aware when it's operating. So what does maybe not blatant discrimination, you don't have to investigate, but it's those the microaggressions, the things where people question whether or not they are going insane or if it's actually a systemic thing that's happening to them. I feel like there needs to be a process in place. So if I, as an employee, come forward, I have to be brave enough to come forward and say, hey, this is what's going on. I noticed something was going on and now I'm bringing it to your attention. These organizations should have a process in place, because if things are happening, I'm bringing it forward, but then nothing is happening to rectify that. There's no point in me coming forward because I can make things difficult for myself. And then the behaviors continue because nobody's stopping them. So workplace organizations would do well to have a process in place. And I think someone mentioned it, hiring a DEI officer who they can consult with if they need more information or more expertise on what it means to look for it and how to then deal with it. But if none of these things are in place, then there's no reason to change. I think that's kind of in many places where people still are.
Thank you, Lonnie. Really appreciate that. We have about just about 10 more minutes before we move on and finish our conversation today on workplace discrimination. And I know it's a very big topic, and we could go on for hours with many participants as well. You bridged in nicely to what are some of the strategies we can use to support team building in all of our organizations. I wondered if, Sharif, if you could speak to that as an MPP in the community. How do you see that as working for team building? You see a lot of people, you meet a lot of people in the community, all different levels, and I wonder if you can speak to that from just the work that you do as an MPP.
Like, like I have to say, I have to say a few things. Like, the community is changing, dynamically changing. Like things about accepting our differences or celebrating our differences or enjoying the differences of our, like we have team who's like speaking 5 different languages, or like we can reach out to many communities, or like in my case, I attend like with all communities, different communities, and get introduced to them, learn more about them, learn lots of details about the community. With more diversity, it's a snowball. The more diversity create more diversity,
Yeah.
because the people will feel more comfortable knowing about different people, different communities, and they start feeling that barrier, that discomfort is not there anymore. That's why I'm saying with our kids, it's much more easier because they already grown in a class which have all kind of different ethnicities, all kind of different colors, different races, and everyone is proud of his as young kids. Of course, they don't have the, I would say they are more there than us. We are having considerations and we calculate things. They don't. They speak up their minds. So it's easier to see that synergy, building up the kids better, to be better tolerant to differences and stuff. So I see it's happening. It's getting better and better. The acceptance, other accepting the diversity, and that's a good thing. Now, with some focus in education for the kids, will even accelerate that, enrich that, and enhance it to a level where everybody knows that we are different, and that difference doesn't mean any bad or good. We are different because we are different. That's it. And it's good to have different people, different minds, different way of thinking, and different culture, backgrounds, ethnicities, even religion, everything. Like the discussions become much more enriched when we are different, and we can celebrate that. We can enjoy it, and I think that will eliminate lots of what we see. Again, like I remember when you are in a corporate where you are the only person who are different, the situation for you is much different than being in an organization where it's like 50 different people from different ethnicities. You understand what I'm saying? Like going to a village, for example, in the north, where you are the only family who is not from the city or from the village or from that kind of ethnicity or that group. Everybody knows you, everybody dealing with you, everybody looking at you, everybody staring at you sometimes because you're different. But when the city have like hundreds of different groups, nobody have that same attitude or same sensitivity or the same attention, because it's become a normal day-to-day life, kind of fact of life.
Beautiful. And exploring what it means to be a world citizen is really what our mantra is. All of us are doing. Really, it's the richness of our communities, richness of our country, to have that diversity, but celebrating the uniqueness and the oneness of each other, right? Lonnie, yes, we're just about ready to, we got about 5 more minutes before I know a few people have to step out to other meetings. Thank you so much, Lonnie. Thank you.
So, and I completely agree with what you're saying, Sharif, around the generation of children in Canada today. And they are the ones who are making up our classroom. But then we have to wonder, who was the adult leading the way? Who was the facilitator? Who was the teacher in the room? Because if the teacher in the room doesn't believe, hasn't bought into the openness and the oneness and the acceptance and the tolerance, then the children aren't going to, like, the society says children should be seen and not heard. And so if a teacher says it's time to be quiet, this conversation is over, then the conversation is over. So we need to make sure that our educators have bought into what it is that we're trying to do here, what the children are trying to do. And if we have an educator who is like, this is great, let's look at the diversity. And so I think of the school that my children go to. My daughter came home the other day and said to me, this boy in my class said that girls can't drive and girls shouldn't drive and shouldn't drive trucks and girls don't go to work. And so it's very clear because the school that she goes to has a high immigrant and refugee population. And so what I'm assuming is they're coming in with what they know, what has been true for them. And so I say to my daughter, I go to work, I drive a car. We have a friend down the street who is a girl and who is a woman, and she drives a big transport truck. So we really have to have these conversations of what are you hearing and what are you seeing in the world. And at home, she gets that because I'm talking to her. But my question now is to the teacher in an email. I'm just wondering what are the conversations you're having to make sure that students are not saying anything that can be hurtful or harmful to other people. Because now my daughter's thinking she's not allowed to drive when she grows up because another student came in and said that. So we really have to be mindful who's facilitating these conversations if they're being facilitated at all.
Mm-hmm. I loved how you said that, Lonnie, and brought that up in this conversation. I know you've mentioned it in other panels before. The teachers do have to buy into it, and it has to be authentic, right? So I truly appreciate you mentioning that today. We have a few more minutes, and I apologize if we have to wrap up tightly here, but I wondered if we have any closing comments in terms of workplace discrimination and strategies moving forward. We're here for the Toronto Diversity Festival, wrapping up our summer-long festival, but it's our final installment, celebrating the oneness of humanity for Moksha Canada Foundation, and we're doing a shout out to Moksha for allowing us to be here. Final comments, words of wisdom, perhaps moving forward for anybody listening and tuning in, and enabling people for the work that they do in their own communities. Mm-hmm.
Canada is trying really hard. I know I live in Peel, and Peel is doing is investing a lot of time and money into moving in the right direction. It's slow moving, but I can remain hopeful that we're trying. And as long as people continue to try, we can see movement. That's my last words there.
Thank you.
I think you're going to say something.
Yeah.
It's I put my voice to Lori as well. It's a work in progress, and it can be better. Yes, we can continue moving the bar slowly, but as long as it's moving in the right direction, I think that's what matters. Changing in the society, in the community, usually take time. It's not something like a trigger or a law where we say that was allowed yesterday, but it's not allowed today. It will take time to swallow those changes, and it become like I would say normalized in the behavior of the community and behavior of the people, behavior of the parents, behavior of the kids. But again, like as I mentioned, I always will say and continue saying, school is the start of everything, because you might not be able to change an immigrant who came to here when he's like 50 years old, but his kids who are in grade 5 or 6 or 7, it's easily can be changed with time. So I think we need to continue focusing in school. And again, like I worked very hard with Peel when we had some of the Peel this school board having some issues, discrimination issues against Black, and we both brought in Minister Latche, and we took some bold actions to change that. I would say norm in a way. No, it's not norm. It will be changed. And at some point in time, we had to put some appointed superintendent to make sure that the changes take place and we don't see more cases of that. So again, like very happy to be here because as one of the people who experienced discrimination in parts of my life, I can recognize it. I might a little be different because I'm a fighter. I would fight, and I encourage people to have a fight, have a stand, have I would say tolerance to deal with it. Like dealing with discrimination is a skill as well. We need to encourage and we need to train. Very similar to dealing with pressures, dealing with stress, dealing with hard people. Like there's lots of courses in the workplace to deal with different situations. Dealing with discrimination is one of the most important ones, and I can see there's a lot of workplace now have that as a mandatory course, dealing with discrimination or recognizing discrimination, or some training for to make sure that the employees understand that they might be doing which doesn't look like discrimination, could be actually discrimination.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sarah, please and thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lynn, for the invitation. And I also want to thank the Moksha Foundation as well for organizing this panel. And Sharif and Lonnie, it was a pleasure to have this conversation and learn from you as well. I think just to wrap up my thoughts, I would like to say that one of the real beauties of Canada as a nation is its diversity, the mosaic that kind of holds the different citizens together, how we celebrate our differences and honor them. You know, I'm thinking of like, I recently saw a samosa poutine, which was actually delicious. So if we take this kind of integration, this kind of inclusivity that we see at the cultural level and juxtapose it at the workplace, the happiest employees I've spoken to are the ones that are in these very inclusive workplaces where everyone gets along, where there are very transparent promotional practices, for example. If we could have that kind of setting at all workplaces across Canada, I think that is a common goal that we can work towards as fans of inclusivity.
Amazing. Humble gratitude to all of our guests here today for the Toronto Diversity Festival panel discussion, talking about workplace discrimination. We could certainly go on. Final words of wisdom from all of our panelists. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to Moksha Canada Foundation for allowing us to be here on this platform to learn and grow together along the way and the richness of our communities. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.